If you're watching this video, you can probably relate to the story of one of my personal training clients. Although he eats almost entirely healthy foods, his body fat percentage is higher than he would like it to be. But the number one thing holding him back right now is overeating healthy foods. Once you graduate from cutting out processed, artificial and fast foods, all the unhealthy junk food we shouldn't be eating, you can still eat too much healthy food. And too much of anything, even if it's a good thing, can become a bad thing. Because at the end of the day, all calories are made equally. And if you consume too many calories, even if they're from healthy sources, this can lead to the accumulation of body fat. And having too much body fat is bad for your overall health and your testosterone levels and your appearance. So in this video, I'm going to share some strategies that I've used to help overcome overeating and that I also use with my clients so that you can apply them to your daily life. Number one, reduce your use of condiments and seasonings. If you put enough salt, pepper, ketchup, and barbecue on anything, you can make it taste good. For example, if you have plain chicken thighs and you don't put anything on them, you'll eat to the point where you're full, you're satisfied. But if you put some barbecue on there, then it's much easier to continue eating more and more chicken thighs to the point where you've overeaten. The other problem with condiments is they also have calories in and of themselves. So ketchup and barbecue, especially if they aren't simple, labeled as simple with only a few ingredients, they can have high fructose corn syrup, and this is essentially liquid sugar. Another example for condiments would be mayo and ranch. These are arguably worse because they are fat-based and much more calorically dense than things like ketchup and barbecue. Because just to set the context, fats have 9 calories per gram, whereas carbs and sugars, which or what ketchup and barbecue are made of, have 4 calories per gram. So things like ranch and mayo add up calories much quicker. But this circling back to the central point is that condiments have 2 problems when it comes to overeating healthy foods. Number one, they make healthy foods taste better than they would naturally taste, but they also add in their own calories, which can really add up if you don't pay attention. So if you cut out, extremely limit condiments, this can help you stop overeating. Even low calorie or 0 calorie condiments like mustard or Frank's Red Hot or salt and pepper, even though those don't have any calories, they still make healthy foods taste a lot better than they do naturally, and that makes it much easier to overeat them. So too with things like seasonings. Like I said, if you put enough salt on anything, it's going to taste good. So step number 1 is reduce your use of condiments and seasonings. Step number 2 is to stop combining more than one food ingredient. I'll paint this with my number 1 vice when it comes to food, which is yogurt moles, yogurt mixes. Plain Greek yogurt by itself is pretty good, but once you have a couple tablespoons, couple cups of it, and you feel full, it's not really, again, like chicken thighs, it's not really appetizing and you're not going to be apt to overeat it. But once you add in protein powder, which has artificial sweeteners to make it taste good, and then maybe some fruit, maybe some honey, maybe some mixed nuts, all of these ingredients in isolation are healthy and good for you, but when you combine them together, the whole tastes much better than the individual parts, and it's so much easier to overeat that because you are essentially creating a hyper palatable food. Hyper palatable means very easy to overeat. So again, going back to that yogurt bowl example, if you were to take out all of those ingredients, it would be very hard to overeat them in isolation. No one's going to eat 9 bananas in a row, or 5 cups of Greek yogurt, or 3 dry scoops of protein powder. But when you put them all together, they taste really good, and it's much easier to overeat the combination. Another example of this is sweet potato and butter. Even though I could see myself overeating grass-fed butter or sweet potato in isolation because that's just me and both are really good. But it's much easier to overeat sweet potatoes when you're adding several tablespoons of butter, because sweet potato plus butter tastes a lot better than just sweet potato or butter. See if I can think of any other examples for you off the top of my head. Another one is even things like avocado toast. Whole grain toast, it's not the healthiest thing, but it's good for you. It's healthy. But once you take whole grain bread and then you add on avocado and then you add on tuna, you've made we'll call this a tuna melt, you've made the tuna melt much more appetizing than if you were to just eat tuna or avocado or whole grain bread in isolation. Any of those single ingredients is good, but you're not going to overeat them in one sitting. But when you combine them all together, you've now created a hyperpalatable food. And hyperpalatable foods are exactly what the processed food industry uses to hijack our reward systems in our brains. Human beings didn't really evolve to eat fats and sugars together. For example, ice cream is milk and sugar, essentially. And milk and sugar taste much better in isolation than just pure milk or pure sugar. So the combination of the two makes them hyperpalatable, and that's why so many people have an ice cream addiction, which the processed food industry profits from. But when you, in your own life, are trying to be healthy and you buy Greek yogurt instead, what you don't realize is you're basically making the equivalent of ice cream by adding bananas and other things. So I hope I'm not rambling here, but the main point is the more ingredients that you add together, the better the totality of the ingredients is going to taste than those ingredients in isolation. So the actionable takeaway for you is to try to just eat one or two ingredients at a time. You don't have to go super far with this, but with your Greek yogurt, maybe just have yogurt and berries and don't add the protein powder. Just a side note on protein powder is, although it increases your protein intake, I've noticed in my life, it's strangely addicting. I would find myself taking a bite of a banana or an apple and then throwing in a scoop of protein powder because they usually add artificial sweeteners and it makes things taste much better. And it's easy to justify because you're saying, oh, I'm getting in more protein. But I would have days where I would exceed my protein number by like 50 or 70 grams of protein. And since protein's 4 calories per gram, whatever 50 times 4, that's whatever number that adds up to, that was putting me in a calorie surplus and leading to me not being as lean as I would have liked to have been. So protein powder, for whatever reason, is another one that try to limit yourself to just 1 or 2 scoops a day and leave it at that, because it makes consuming other foods much easier. I probably wouldn't have, in many cases, gone for the banana all by itself, but since in the back of my mind, I knew that protein powder is so tasty, I used eating the banana as a rationale for also eating the protein powder. So things like this, protein bars are another example. These are essentially hyperpalatable foods in disguise. So be mindful of those. The next point I want to make is to understand, I guess we'll quickly go back to the concept of calorie density, just really quick, if this is something you're not familiar with. Like we said, fats have 9 calories per gram, protein and carbs have 4 calories per gram. So when you are looking for protein sources, like maybe your Greek yogurt or your steaks, try to buy lower fat varieties, like low fat Greek yogurt or 90% ground beef instead of 80 or 85, because if you aren't conscious and mindful of all of the fats in your diet, they can really add up. So too with mixed nuts, going back to that yogurt example, although mixed nuts are very good for you, the difference between 1 handful and 1.5 handfuls can be 400 calories. So just being aware of the fats in your diet is something that's important. One more example of this before moving on is using olive oil when you're cooking your vegetables or any of your food. Most people cook in olive oil, some people cook in butter or coconut oil. An extra tablespoon of olive oil, which really isn't much, is an extra 130 calories, and those can really add up fast. So although olive oil and grass-fed butter have health benefits, you need to be mindful of your overall consumption because they're really dense in calories. The next point I want to make is fiber. So my client, this CEO, he didn't eat much vegetables. And this is a problem when it comes to overeating because fiber fills you up. It's satiating. It takes up a lot of space in your stomach and it makes you feel full. So when you eat fiber, it makes you feel full, but also without adding too many calories, because vegetables all by themselves have very few calories. So if you, like him, don't eat much vegetables, incorporate more of those into your diet and it's going to make you feel full. It's going to take up space in your stomach so that there's less room for calorie dense foods. The next point is to meal prep. So this is something that I've really incorporated into my life strictly lately and it's been very helpful. And that is eating essentially the same 3 meals every single day and then leaving dinner up for variety. So right now, this is what my eating pattern looks like. Four plain hard-boiled eggs in the morning, a Greek yogurt bowl with just Greek yogurt and fruit, so only 2 ingredients, before a workout, a pre-dinner protein-dense snack, and then dinner. But those 3 first meals, the eggs, the Greek yogurt, and the pre-dinner snack, all of those are the exact same, just about the exact same every single day. Maybe I'll swap out an apple instead of a banana a day, but the calories are all the same. So I know every day what my calorie number is for those first 3 meals. And at the end of the day, I know exactly how many calories I have left for dinner. There's a couple benefits of doing this. Number 1, you only have to count your calories for dinner. A lot of people that I speak to have this issue where counting calories is so laborious that they might count their breakfast and their lunch, but then they're so fed up with it at the end of the day that they don't count their dinner and they overeat calories. But if you already know how many calories you're eating for the first few meals of the day, and you only have to count 1 meal, which is dinner, then you're more apt to stick to calorie counting. And if you want to be really strict, you can meal prep your dinner as well, but that's not entirely necessary. The other benefit is you can count your calories for your dinner before you eat it, so you know once I finish this plate, I have no calories left for the day, and you know that's when it's time to stop eating. Because at least for me and from a lot of the clients that I speak to, most people have a hard time with overeating with dinner specifically. And there's scientific basis for this. To keep it really simple, the part of your brain that's responsible for self-control is called the prefrontal cortex. And we use this part of our brains all day long, out in our jobs, making decisions, and working hard using our brains. But then at the end of the day, actually the brain requires a lot of energy. So at the end of the day, you feel exhausted, your prefrontal cortex is out of energy, so it's much harder to not overeat dinner because your prefrontal cortex is so exhausted. So by counting your calories before eating dinner, setting out your plate, and then putting the food away, you don't have to use the muscle of self-control. You just know once I finish eating what's on this plate, I'm done. So that's the benefit of meal prepping. Going back to the main point, meal prepping your first few meals so that you know you have the same amount of calories left at the end of every day for dinner. The other related point I'll make on this topic is I have found in my own experience that distributing calories throughout the day is much more sustainable than what a lot of people do, which is not eating breakfast or fasting all the way through. Some people only eat 1 meal a day and they only eat dinner. I've tried, and believe it or not, I was able to exceed my calorie limit all in 1 meal and dinner. Because when you're extremely hungry, your brain is programmed from evolution to seek out calorie-dense foods and hyperpalatable foods. So if you push yourself to the point, if you don't eat, and you push yourself to the point where you're really hungry, the first thing you're gonna go for is the higher fat cut of steak or the sweet potato instead of squash. And you're also going to subconsciously cut off a bigger slab of butter if you're gonna cook your steak in that, because your brain is trying to prevent you from starving. So by distributing your calories throughout the day, number 1, you never feel too famished at any point, but you also don't feel too full. You don't feel too full and too stuffed. And this also reduces the habit of overstuffing yourself. I used to do 2 meals a day, and the problem was I would essentially overeat both meals, and that would condition my body and my brain to overeat. But now that I distribute calories throughout the day, I'm just so used to not feeling super full that I'm more sensitive to feeling full, so that once I do start feeling full with dinner, I notice it more. I'm like, oh, I'm starting to feel full. I'm not used to this. It's probably time to stop eating. So that, to put both of those tips into one actionable takeaway for you, is meal prep your first few meals. And if you haven't already, try distributing your calories and especially your protein throughout the day, so you never feel too hungry and famished, but you never also feel too overly full and stuffed. Let me try to remember what the next point I wanted to make on that was. Oh, on a related point is a pre-dinner snack. So remember how we were just talking about how your brain is exhausted at the end of the day, so it's hard to have executive function. One strategy that I've used to reduce overeating at dinner, which is my number one vice and the number one thing I hear from most people is overeating dinner specifically, is to have a protein and fiber dense snack about 30 minutes to an hour before dinner. So the way I do this, I'm a personal trainer. So I bring 8 ounces of ground beef and vegetables with me to the gym. So at about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, right around 6 o'clock, when I'm wrapping up with my last client, after I'm done, I eat that ground beef and vegetables before biking home, so that by the time I get home, the food has had time to settle in my stomach and the satiety response is kicking in. So when I sit down for dinner, I'm already about halfway full and I'm not ravenous at dinner, and this kind of takes the edge off that hunger and reduces the tendency to overeat. So while we're on that topic of the pre-dinner snack, another thing to keep in mind is the satiety delay. A lot of times it takes at least a half hour to start feeling full from your meals. So sometimes I'll finish one of my pre-programmed meal preps and I'm like, damn, I still feel a little bit hungry. But after waiting about 20 minutes and the food starts to settle in, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm actually not hungry anymore. So whenever you're eating dinner or your meals, if you have a tendency to just keep eating and eating and eating until you feel full, I would advise you to have half of your meal and then go do something else to give your satiety response time to kick in. For example, when we're eating dinner here at my house, we have our first serving, and then halfway through dinner, I stop eating, do all the cleanup, put everything away, and if I'm still hungry or if I still have calories left, then I'll have the second half of dinner. Sometimes I'll even go and shower before coming back and finishing dinner, my second plate for my allotted number of calories. And this gives the food time to start digesting and gives your body time to release those satiety signals, which reduces the propensity to overeat. So that's another takeaway for you. If you eat and you still feel kind of hungry, just wait about 20 minutes before you keep eating. Something else that just came to mind, popped into my mind, is making sure to drink water as you're eating. Water takes up space in your stomach, but it also washes food down your esophagus. Believe it or not, it can actually take a few minutes for food to travel all the way down your esophagus into your stomach. So when you drink water as you're eating, it washes all the food down immediately, which can not only make you feel fuller by drinking water, but it accelerates that satiety response so you actually are aware of how much food that you've eaten just a few minutes ago. Next up is, we talked about brain fatigue, we talked about the satiety gap, is reminders. So in my kitchen, on the fridge and on the cupboards, there are sticky notes and they say different things. Some of them are, be mindful, Josh, or your future self will regret. And it might seem a little bit extreme, but if overeating is something that you really struggle with, just consuming too much food volume, seeing those sticky notes right by the cupboard handle will force you to look at it and remind yourself, wait, do I really need to keep eating, or am I just gonna give into this process of overeating that I've succumbed to? And it can be really helpful. Speaking of the future self, just this is more of a mindset shift, but think of how you feel after you overeat, and when you're about to overeat, think, is this extra bit of food really worth how guilty and how overly stuffed I'm going to feel after overeating? Because for context, with my client, he said that his problem with overeating at dinner is that it would make him feel so overfull and stuffed that when he went to bed, he actually had a hard time sleeping because he was so full from dinner, and it threw off his sleep quality. And this is something that I've experienced as well, getting home late, overeating dinner, and then going to bed super stuffed. It's hard to fall asleep. And a quick side tangent, the reason for this is because your body is investing more biological energy into digesting the food instead of giving you restorative sleep. So overeating dinner can definitely affect your sleep quality in a negative way. So as much as you can, try to remember in the moment that you're eating, if you are starting to overeat, think, what am I doing to my future self? Will my future self regret this? And when you can kind of detach from the moment and put your mind in the future, it makes you realize that the decisions you make now will have negative effects in just a few minutes. So always keep your future self in mind. So that's the other tips. Put sticky notes around to remind yourself not to overeat, and think of your future self. We talked about cleaning up dinner halfway through. Another topic on the sticky note front, and this tip comes from a book called Atomic Habits from James Clear. He says that one of the laws of behavior change is to, if you want to encourage a behavior, make it satisfying. So if you want to encourage yourself to not overeat, you have to make it satisfying. And one way that I do that is I have a little scoreboard. I have another sticky note on the fridge, and it's a scoreboard of Josh versus food. And I have a bunch of tally marks. Every time I stay under my calorie limit, or if I'm not counting calories that day, I stop eating before I feel too full, I give a tally next to Josh. But anytime I go over my calorie limit, or I go eating to the point where I'm overly stuffed, I put a tally mark next to food. So now I'm making it a competition of me versus food. And it's really satisfying to see more tally marks by my name, but it's in the inverse, unsatisfying to see more tally marks next to food. So by kind of keeping track of your progress in this way and giving yourself a reward, which is a tally mark next to your name every time you win, you can kind of get a streak going and make it a habit to not overeat. One other thing that I've incorporated a little bit is fasting. Now, this isn't a strategy to avoid overeating, but it's a strategy to improve your self-control. A lot of times we feel so pulled by hunger and food that we become enslaved to it, essentially. Like the moment we feel hungry, we feel we need to go eat. But if you fast for, my favorite amount of time to fast is 36 hours, because it's a little longer than a day, but I find that 48 hours is just too much. But if you do about 24 to 36 hour fast, you show yourself that, you know what? I don't really need food. I'm the master of food. I choose when to eat and how much to eat. And then you can take that same insight that you gleaned from fasting and that self-control muscle that you've developed and applied it to more micro moments, such as at dinner whenever you are on the verge of overeating. You can think to yourself, wait a minute, I've fasted for 36 hours. I don't need food. I've been able to control myself in the past and not eat at all. So I don't need to overeat in this moment. So I don't know. Some people may consider this an eating disorder or whatever, but don't really care because it works. Whenever I get into a phase where I've overeaten for a couple days or I'm just losing control over my ability to restrain myself from overeating, I program in a fasting day to regain control and prove to myself that I'm the master of food. Food is not the master of me. It'd be a topic for a whole separate video, but fasting in and of itself is very good for you. It has a lot of health benefits and it's evolutionarily consistent because there would have been times where cavemen wouldn't have had access to food. So fasting is something you should do for health benefits, but it also gives you more control over yourself. So I'd highly recommend fasting. And kind of on the topic of, from a more philosophical standpoint, on the topic of mastering food, is at the end of the day, if you can detach and realize that food is just atoms. It's really, let me think of how I can explain this. I'll just give you some context so you know where this is coming from. If you've ever heard of Stoicism, it's a philosophy that originated in ancient Greece. And Marcus Aurelius is one of the best known names in Stoicism. And in one of his entries, he wrote, and it's funny because Marcus Aurelius, based on his philosophical writings, this guy was the emperor of Rome. He struggled with overeating as well. And this was a time before there were hyper-palatable foods, before processed foods. So overeating is something that human beings have been struggling with since food deprivation was no longer a problem. So I guess another side tangent is don't feel too guilty about it or that there's something wrong with you. Our brains are programmed and hardwired to make us want to overeat so we can survive. The cavemen that overate the most had the best chance of not starving to death. So I'm coming back to the point here. Marcus Aurelius made the point that your food it's just a dead animal. It's just a plant. And if you want to be really biological and scientific about it, it's just atoms. And so too with the feeling of food tasting good in your brain. All it is little neurochemicals and molecules floating around in your brain. It doesn't actually mean anything. And just this understanding that all anything is just atoms and it doesn't actually have to affect you in any way can kind of help you detach. You can take a step back and look at your food and think, this is just atoms. There's no reason why I should let it make me behave compulsively. So that mindset shift, that It's just dead animals and plants and atoms. Kind of makes you separate yourself from the pleasure that you get from eating. And speaking of the pleasure, another thing to keep in mind is it's just going to arise and pass away. You know, we talked about making food taste less good and hyper palatable by not combining ingredients and everything, but it's still possible to overeat food. Understand that the pleasure you get from eating is going to appear. You'll taste it for a couple seconds, couple minutes, and then it's going to go away. So if you can remind yourself that, wait a minute, all I'm doing by overeating is extending that pleasure curve a little bit further, the pleasure is still going to go away afterwards. So why not end the pleasure curve before you overeat? Because the pleasure curve is going to end anyway. You might as well stop overeating before it has negative consequences, because all you're gaining by overeating is a couple extra seconds of pleasure. And guess what? You're going to get to eat again tomorrow. This is something that, just a little insight, a little realization that has helped me a lot, is that whenever I think, man, I'll stop eating dinner, I'll stop at my calorie limit, and I'll think, man, I really want to keep eating, and I'll look at the fruit bowl and I'll think, gosh, I could really go for an apple right now. I just think, wait a second, my calorie limit restarts tomorrow. I can just eat an apple tomorrow. All I have to do is, there's no reason why I need to have the pleasure now when I can just delay the gratification. I'm going to get to eat again. You're going to get to eat again pretty much every single day, except for your fasting days, for the rest of your life. So don't get stuck in this mindset of food scarcity. It's just your brain playing tricks on you, and you're going to get to eat again. This meal that you really want to overeat is not the last meal you're ever going to. And pleasure, every single day, that pleasure curve is going to arise and pass away, arise and pass away. So by taking a big step back psychologically and just being aware of this process of pleasure arising and going away, and that you're going to have more pleasure again and again for the rest of your life, you can kind of realize that there's no point in overeating at all. There's just no point to it. Let me see if I had any other tips for you that would be helpful. We talked about pleasure. I guess I'll talk about, to end this video, how self-control compounds. So every time you stop yourself from overeating, that muscle of stopping yourself gets stronger. It's actually amazing. After just a few times of, watching your hand reaching for the extra apple or reaching for the extra banana, every time you pull your hand back, your ability to pull your hand back gets stronger and stronger, to the point where at a certain point it's just automatic and it doesn't take effort to restrain yourself. Now, at a certain point, you don't want to be reliant on effort. It's better to design your environment to make it easier to not overeat. So for example, maybe put your fruit in the fridge so it's out of sight, out of mind, instead of out in a fruit bowl, or put the mixed nuts way on the high back end of the shelf so they're harder to reach. Essentially what I'm trying to say is, yes, it's important to develop the muscle of self-control, and yes, it does get stronger the more you use it. But if you can combine that with making your environment in such a way that it's hard to overeat and it's hard to access more, you can set yourself up for success. Because you can have all the self-control in the world, but if you are in a calorie deficit and you're hungry and you're surrounded by food options all day long, anyone's going to cave at a certain point. So combining those two things can be helpful. You need to that's all I got for this video. Those are the main points I think I wanted to cover. I hope that was helpful, and you'll get to the point where food is no longer something, you'll get to the point where you're like a monk and you just see food as something that you use to keep you alive and fuel your performance, but that's really it. And it might sound a little bit sadistic to say that you got to get to the point where food is no longer a source of pleasure, maybe once a year at Thanksgiving or something, but if you can just separate pleasure and eating, you're going to be better off for the rest of your life. That's all I have for this video. Good luck.